Yo, Big D back with a UFC 282 preview on the Big D podcast. Before I bring in my UFC friend, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page to see all my content. Also, check out the Big D podcast for all your audio listeners on Spotify and Apple. So joining me today, the only guy who feels he can take down George St. Pierre and Tom Brady. That would be Billy Ward. Billy, last pay-per-view of the year. You know what that means.
Well, it used to mean something different than it means this year because we used to get a huge blowout at the end of the year. Not going to be the case this time. We had the loss of the original main event with Yuri Prohaska and Glover running it back. So, a little bit of a smaller pay-per-view in terms of excitement level, but you know, last one we got one more fight night and a break for a little while, so might as well enjoy it while we have it.
Yeah, before we talk about the main event for Saturday night's card, I'm a little bit. You mentioned the one fight, the one main event fight that was scheduled to take place between Yuri and Grover this year. Well, I remember that crazy fight. It was because Grover was just like 41, 42-year old champ, and then Yuri came in. And I didn't think Grover had a chance, and they both went toe to toe. And Yuri ended up submitting Grover late, but that was a great fight. And I wanted to see it again.
Yeah, and that's the shame of this one because we were going with only one title fight, which usually they do two on the pay-per-views. But it's like, well, it's a rematch of one of the better fights we've seen in a long, long time, so we can accept it under those circumstances. Now Yuri has a shoulder injury. He vacated the belt. They offered Glover one of these guys. He said he wanted more time to prepare, as he should, because they're totally different opponents than Yuri. So then they just kind of shoved him out of the way because they needed a title fight here. So again, it's a title fight. I think they've promised Glover the next shot at whoever wins this, and then probably Yuri will be back by then for the next shot. But they're calling it an undisputed title, but it really feels like an interim situation since we have the next couple challengers planned out.
I feel like this is more like when like somebody retires and boxing the UFC can ill afford to not have a solid. They need a title fight. Well, this is like the so what title fight. At least it's a sort of a title fight.
Yeah, the thing that annoys me is the decision to make interim belts or real titles or whatever seems totally random. Like Volkanovski is going up to challenge for the 155, but they're doing an interim 145 when Francis Ngannou hasn't fought in almost a year. That hasn't been an interim title. This one, Yuri just totally vacated it when it would make sense for an interim title when the champion gets hurt. Like, there's just no rhyme or reason to why they do that. And that's the part that bothers me because if anything deserves to be dubbed an interim and not the real title, it's this one. The champion got hurt. That's why we do that. But apparently not. So who knows? It really doesn't matter at the end of the day what you call it. It's a 5 round fight. It's, two fairly well known fighters. Blachovicz, former champ. Ankalaev has been rising through the ranks for a long time. It kind of seemed like he was getting pushed aside because of the Yuri and Glover rematch. So from his standpoint, he might be the best 205er in the world on a was this 9 fight win streak. So I get why he gets the title shot. It just seems unfair to Yuri and also to Glover.
Yeah, I remember one time. I think it was when Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell were in their rivalry that Dana White created an interim 205 belt because Tito wouldn't fight Chuck Liddell.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's been different in recent years as we've tried to make it more legitimate of a sport. But yeah, let's talk about this main event. What we're seeing from it.
I am intrigued by Ankalaev because I'm excited from him, a 9 fight winning streak. But to me, the question is Ankalaev ready to take the next step and to take on one of the best 205ers in the world in the Polish style?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the best 205ers in the world. Did get submitted by Glover. His only win since then was against Alexander Rakic when Rakic hurt his leg, and that was a fairly close fight. It's not like Blachowicz was dominating him. I think the scorecards were 1-1, and the injury happened in the third round. So, I mean, this is probably the easiest path to the title, I'd say, for Ankalaev against a 40-ish year old Jan Blachowicz, who hasn't really done much in the last couple of years. His last, if you want to say legitimate win, was more than 18 months ago, and that was against middleweight Israel Adesanya. So it's been a long time since we really saw him at the peak of his powers. He's never been the greatest grappler. He gets there more with his striking. And Ankalaev, the Russian grappler, like many of them are, definitely has an advantage on the ground. Probably will be the better athlete at this point in their careers. I don't really see a clear path other than a puncher's chance for Blachowicz in this one. It seems like Ankalaev should win this fairly easily.
I feel the same way because hearing reading about Ankalaev, I feel like he's the more well-rounded, better grappler, probably better conditioning without all the wear and tear of being
Mm-hmm.
39 years old like Glock. Plus, I think Ankalaev wants to prove that he's the 2-5 champ. No matter what happens between Yuri or Grover, he's like, I want that belt. And if I have to beat both of them, so what? I'll beat both of them.
And that kind of seems like how it's going to go. Is it'll be the winner of this fights Glover, and then after that fights Yuri would be my guess. But Ankalaev is probably favored against Glover and pretty close against Yuri, I would guess. So that would be how I would handicap it. Once we get those fights booked, and we'll obviously see how he looks between here and there, which could change a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting from a DFS standpoint, just because we're expecting a stoppage in this one. It should probably be fairly early. And you and I haven't spoke since the UFC or DraftKings started doing late swap for UFC contests. I think this is one where you start with both those guys, and if you're cashing easily and most of your undercard fighters won, then you just leave them both in there and take your points. But if you find yourself behind, if you're a little bit behind, you probably switch off Blachowicz and try to find another underdog with a better shot. Or if you're way behind, you switch off Ankalaev, maybe you get Paddy Pimblett or Ponzinibbio or someone fighting shortly before their fight. Hope you get an upset in the main event. So that's an interesting one. Obviously, speaking from cash games there, and for GPPs, if you think you have a shot but you're blocked by some guys ahead of you, and you have, let's say, Blachowicz and Gordon, maybe you switch to Ankalaev and Pimblett or something like that to try to get a little bit differentiated. So I think that's an interesting element of it. It doesn't seem like a fight where the loser's going to put up a good score. Either Ankalaev is going to take Yuri down and kind of work him. I'm sorry, Jan, or Jan's going to have to knock him out, which probably means not a lot of points for Ankalaev. So this is not one where I think you necessarily want to leave both guys in there. I think you start with both of them. If you have a good lead going into the end, you've got the safer option that way.
Yeah, these darn late swaps put a wrench in everybody's plan because A, now we're staying up till 12:31 in the morning. Well, we would be anyway, but B, now everybody's like jumbling the line. So if my line's doing great, so what? I'll keep it in there. But if I see, oh wait, two of my guys suck, then then I need a plan B.
Yeah, my general outlook is if you get 4 winners of your 6 lineups, more often than not, you're going to cash. So if you have only 2 winners going into the last 2 fights, you don't want 2 guys fighting each other. If you have 3 winners of your first 4, you can probably leave those 2 in there. You've guaranteed yourself 4 wins in your lineup. Probably end up all right. This really strikes me as a fight where the winner will have a very good score. Either a quick knockout from Jan or a ton of takedowns and ground and pound from Ankalaev, but the loser will have almost nothing. So like there'll be a high number of total points, but most of them are going to go into the winner. Where we've seen a lot of these fights that go longer, where there's a high number of total points, but they're kind of more evenly distributed.
This feels like this feels like the one title fight, partly because of the weight class, partly because of the fighting side, where it's more a GPP fight than a cash game fight. Where I think you want to have I think you want to have one of the two fighters, but I'm not sure about having both of them.
Yeah, and that's kind of my logic is if you only need the score from one of them because you did so well early on, leave them both in there. That way you don't have to worry about trying to get it right. If you feel like you probably need 2 more wins, then do you switch off to Jared Gordon in the co-main event? I think he's probably a little bit undervalued right now against Paddy Pimblett. Pimblett really hasn't fought anyone tough in the UFC. He's looked great against the guys he's fought, but it's been lower level competition. Where Gordon's solid. He's not a world beater. I don't think he's going to be a title challenger, but it's definitely a step up for Paddy Pimblett. So there's that option. Even Alex Morono who's replacing Robbie Lawler on the main card to fight Ponzinibbio. Ponzinibbio's 38. I'm sorry, 36, but he's taken a lot of damage. He's lost his last couple. Morono's won 4 in a row, looked pretty good. Morono's the underdog here, but I think if he had had a full training camp, it'd probably be close to a toss-up. That's an option to pivot off one of the cheaper fighters. So there's definitely ways to go about it.
Yeah, you already mentioned Paddy Pimblett, and pay-per-view fans will get the chance to see Mr. Pimblett in action for the first time this weekend. What intrigues you about Mr. Pimblett?
Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how he does against somewhat higher level of competition. He should beat Jared Gordon. Like, he's fighting Jared Gordon for a reason. The UFC does not want Paddy Pimblett to lose. No one really wants that. Gordon's kind of a journeyman, been around for a little bit. Been solid though. He's won 4 of his last 5. They've been some close decisions. His only loss was to Grant Dawson, and I think that tells us something because Grant Dawson's a real high level wrestler, also British. Not that that matters. And I think if there's a weakness in Gordon's game, it's just those high level grapplers, which obviously Pimblett is. The issue I could see is that Grant Dawson has a lot better wrestling than Paddy Pimblett does. So he might have a hard time getting Gordon down. I think this is going to be more competitive than the betting lines suggest, but Paddy Pimblett should ultimately be able to find a submission somewhere in there. I am worried though. He's real wild with his striking, doesn't really seem interested in much defense. Gordon's got some pop, he can catch some guys, real good leg kicks. I could see Pimblett getting himself into trouble here. This is even one where from a betting standpoint, I'm probably laying off ahead of time, but considering betting Jared Gordon live after round 1, depending on how that one goes, because we haven't really seen Pimblett go deep into a fight, and he fights so wildly, it seems like that would be really hard to keep up for 10 or 15 minutes. And we know the issues with his conditioning and how out of shape he gets between fights. So all of that together tells me he's probably not a guy who's going to do well in the 3rd round of a fight. So if Pimblett wins round 1, you see a huge number on Gordon, that might be a good live bet.
And plus, guess how many times Pimblett has fought in the U.S.?
Is it 0 or 1 maybe?
I don't believe he's fought. All of his fights have been in the UK.
All 3? We really went over there 3 times? I'm looking. I believe you. I'm just surprised by it. I don't remember 3 London cards. No, he fought in the Apex Center in his UFC debut.
Okay, all but 1.
Yeah, that's what I said. I knew it. No, it was kind of a guess, but educated guess, I'd say.
All but 1 of his pro fights have come in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much that matters. Like, I think it does to some guys. I will say, like, speaking from a fighter who traveled a lot and stuff, I was more messed up sleeping in my own bed because it wasn't my routine. When I was out on the road in a hotel doing my normal thing, like that felt a lot more natural than, you know, hanging around my house the afternoon of the fight and then driving down to the arena the couple times I did that. So, I don't think it's like the home field advantage we see in other sports being my point.
I mean, I think Pimblent's interesting. He's wild. He can get a little out of control. If Gordon can keep this fight, especially on the ground, maybe get some takedowns, maybe punch and then take him down, that would be Gordon's best chance of making this fight interesting.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit there. I think Gordon needs to keep it standing. He's probably the better wrestler. You're right in that regards. If I'm Jared Gordon, I don't want to play with the submissions of Paddy Pimblett, though. That's where he really shines.
That too.
So, we've seen Pimblett hit guys with flying triangles and cage warriors and pull submissions out of nowhere. I don't think he wants to grapple with Paddy. The question is whether Paddy can take him down. I don't think it's going to be a given that he does. Is Paddy willing to pull guard or go for a flying triangle or, pull some Aljamain Sterling, take your back standing kind of thing? If he's able to do that, then he probably makes pretty short work of Jared Gordon. If he's unable to and we get a lot more striking, Pimblett's defense is bad. He's not really a technical striker. He throws hard. He's athletic, but he doesn't, he's not some guy that could walk into a boxing gym and look good. So it'll be interesting.
What's your DFS cash strategy looking like for this weekend's card? Because this is intriguing. I mean, yeah, the main event, but I'm not sure both fighters look like great catch options. I think one of them will, but but not both of them necessarily. So how are you thinking 48 hours before the first lineup's locked?
Yeah, I was actually running through and doing our projections right before I hopped on this with you. So I haven't quite finished. Anyone, by the time you hear this, the projections, if you're a Fantasy Labs subscriber, will be up. I honestly think the biggest thing is you would be crazy to go into a cash lineup without Raul Rosas Jr., the guy who fought at age 17 on the Contender Series, now making his UFC debut. He's a featherweight, I believe, maybe flyweight, smaller weight class being the point. And all the dude does is grapple. He has a way easier matchup against Jay Perrin than he had on the Contender Series, and he picked up like 6 or 7 takedowns. And it's just these lighter weight wrestlers are awesome for DFS because they don't do a good job of holding their opponents down, but then they just take them back down again. So this is one where, I'm gonna have to manually update our projections to like raise how many takedowns we have in there. And even that is probably not going to be enough. He'll probably end up with 7 or 8. So I think you start every lineup there just because, even compared to the other high priced fighters, his ceiling is just so much higher. And if he's 60% owned and scores 140 from so many takedowns, you're kind of out of luck if you don't have him. Pimblett, I think, similar price range and similar betting odds, don't think is as strong of a play because he's probably not going to get multiple takedowns. If he wins, it's probably because he submits him with the first takedown he gets. Submissions aren't as great. So, not as interested in Paddy. There's honestly none of the heavy favorites outside of Ankalaev and Rosas seem super appealing. So I think it's going to be a lot more balanced lineup. Finding those guys in the mid to upper 8,000s that you like and can actually pull off a win, I think will be the key here.
Yeah, because I don't really like the two of the heavy favorites at 93, Simon or
The
Shabayan?
Bison. Yeah, I
Sabayan?
mean, both those guys, they have really good matchups. I have a lot more trust in Simon. He fought on the Contender Series recently, too, also super young. I think he's not quite 22. The guy he fought, his last fight was against someone 4-4, and his fight before that was against someone 1-1. So they both have 6-0 records, but Kozlov, who's fighting Simon, Kozlov hasn't fought anyone legitimate. Where Simon, beat a 5-1 fighter on the Contender Series, beat a 8-7 before that. They brought him up a little bit. I think Simon does really well here. I just don't know that necessarily translates to the fantasy points we need. Just because a fighter dominates doesn't always mean it's a big score. We pretty much need knockdowns or takedowns. So if a guy's not going to get you either of those, then I'm not going to pay, above 9,000 for.
Do you ultimately believe the UFC late swap is for DFS is good or bad? Because we've experimented with late swaps the last couple of weeks, and it's intriguing to see like 2 guys lock or 3 guys lock. But do you think the late swap is a good thing or bad thing for DFS players?
For who? Which DFS players? With everything, there's going to be winners and losers. And we saw the same thing in NBA where a lot of the casual players were really mad that, late news would scratch one of their guys. And then it just ended up helping the pro players and the sharps way more than they thought because those guys are making late pivots all the time, figuring out the optimal lineup given what they already know. I think this one, if you are watching the fights live and tracking your lineups, it probably helps you. I do that probably 90% of UFC cards. I'm locked in. I will say, if I know I can't watch a fight all the way through, I'm not going to play cash. It just feels like throwing away money at that point. I actually don't think it's a huge impact on GPPs just because you have to find the optimal lineup and you can't pivot to that guy once his fight already happened. So if there's, a fighter in the first fight costs 7,800 and scores 130 points, there's not really a late swap you can do that fixes that. So I don't think it's as important for GPPs. I think some of the smaller GPPs, you can look and you say, okay, there's 2 guys ahead of me. I use the RotoGrinders browser extension that tells you how much salary people have left on the table based on who's already went. There's 2 guys ahead of me. They have this much salary left. That means they're probably playing this fighter. If you're sitting in third and you know that's the case, yeah, swap to somebody else. In a massive GPP where there's 200 of those lineups that are in front of you, it's going to be hard to figure out who you're blocked by and whatnot. So I think it's a huge impact on cash for like the 7 of us that do it. Pretty big impact on smaller field GPPs. I don't think it really matters too much in like the 100K to first place, just because you need the perfect lineup. And if one of your fighters loses early, can't fix that by late swap. Or if you have a lineup that doesn't have, the underdog knockout in the second fight, can't fix that with late swap. So yeah, I guess the biggest thing I would say is if you're not willing or able to watch the fights and adapt as you go, definitely don't play cash. Probably don't play smaller field GPPs. And you've lost some equity. You're losing some edge if you're not watching. For those of us who are sitting in front of the TV, updating it every single fight, gives us a little bit more of a boost, I'd say.
I think it also helps if you find out if you find out the one time a month where somebody can't fight and all of a sudden we're like rumbling, fumbling, stumbling, because remember I think it was a couple weeks ago where
The Derek Lewis, yeah.
where the Derek Lewis fight didn't happen and we're like, oh crap, now what?
But again, that's one that, 10, 20% of the field probably isn't going to catch that news in time. Or if they do hear the news, there's not going to be they're not going to hear it right away, so they won't have as many options to pivot to. And it's going to help more. It's going to be more of a benefit to those of us who already have a plan in place, already have projections in front of them, know who the best options are, can use the FantasyLabs optimizer to re-optimize a lineup based on the guys who've already gone while subtracting those fighters. That's what I did in that one. I X'd out those two from my player pool. I locked in the fighters that are already gone. And I just clicked optimize. Like someone who has those resources and the time and is paying attention benefits more from the fighter getting scratched than some guy who just threw $20 in and is out at the bar with his friends or whatever.
Okay, quickly as we end here, get ready to end the UFC 2022 season. What fight are you looking forward to the most early in 2023?
Ooh, there's a ton of them. I don't know if we're counting it as early. I am kind of excited to see Bo Nickel make his actual debut. That'll be fun. And I'm looking forward a little bit. I'm actually really excited about Volkanovski versus Makhachev when they go to Australia. One, they better get Tai Tuivasa on that card in Australia just for fun. Love that guy. I think it's going to be just a fun card. They haven't been to Australia in a long time. Really excited to see how Volkanovski goes up in weight, deals with a guy with that kind of wrestling. Like Volkanovski's awesome, one of my favorite fighters. We haven't seen him pushed in a long time. And a lot of these going up in weight, Adesanya went up 20 pounds to fight Jan Blachovicz. Volkanovski only has to go up 10 pounds, and he's a big dude. And I don't think Makhachev is a particularly huge 55er either. So, that's one of those where I think there's a more legitimate shot of him challenging and becoming a two-weight champ than with something like Adesanya's more recent attempt at that.
I think the Volkanovski fight's interesting because because the fact that we could have a multi belt hole in the UFC is something cool. I remember Conor McGregor, Daniel Cormier having multiple belts, but the fact you could have Volkanovski do it in Australia, no less, would be something. Because
Yeah, and I was gonna say those two are kind of less legitimate because DC only got the 205 belt by John Jones vacating it. It's not like he ever beat the best guy in both those divisions. McGregor, it was kind of gimmicky. He didn't really defend the titles. They gave him a pretty straightforward path to the title. They weren't making him really earn his way up or whatever. So this would be the most legit one we've seen probably since Cejudo. So it'll be fun.
And I mean, in fact, UFC's finally going down under, mate, would be fun because the Aussie fans would probably have a few beers if
Well, and
Volkanovski won.
there's like 1,000 Australian or New Zealand based UFC fighters now. Like I feel like every adult male in Australia is on a UFC roster. So they've got plenty of talent to pick from. They've got, legit fighters like Volkanovski who we're excited to see. We've also got guys like Tai Tuivasa who is just fun and also good, like not to take anything away from him. So yeah, that card I'm really looking forward to. What I'm most looking forward to is like a month with no UFC so I can take a break though, if we're being honest.
I would agree because I think we all need a rest. Just focus our energy on football, right?
Yeah.
All right, Billy. Thanks for hopping on. We wish you folks happy holiday, Merry Christmas, and get ready for a crazy, wild UFC call this weekend. And happy, healthy 2023.
Yep, make sure you go check out the projections if you're a DFS subscriber to Fantasy Labs. We'll have all kinds of articles and betting stuff up there at Action Network as well. Thanks for having me, Dylan.